There's nothing that can power up your marketing than asking your customers the right questions. It often holds the key to unlocking the next level of growth. Now, Katya Ryabova, founder of SMM Headquarters, uses 3 powerful questions to help subscription-based businesses uncover actionable insight and identify growth opportunities. In episode 60 of the Marketing Powerups Show, you learn first of all, Katya's 3 customer questions for unlocking growth. Second, how to make people feel comfortable during customer interviews. Third, how marketing teams can stay ethical while driving growth. And number 4, a power-up that has accelerated Katya's career. Now, before we get started, I created a free power-up cheat sheet that you can download and use Katya's 3 questions for unlocking growth. Get it now, marketingpowerups.com, or find the link in the show notes and description. Are you ready? Let's go.
Marketing Power-Ups. Ready? Go! Here's your host, Rambly John.
Katya, I'm super excited to chat with you about research and marketing and ethics, and really like digging into your experience here around marketing and your background in research. Before we jump in, I know you're like a big fan of customer research. I've already had a few folks come on the show. We talked about Claire Solentrop about customer research, but like I just want to reiterate this for people who are listening, why customer research is so powerful and so useful for people who are like, marketers who are tuning in here. Maybe just like, why is it so important to you? Why should marketers care about customer research?
Customer research for me is a way to remove assumptions from the equation. Maybe not completely, but I think the biggest mistake we make, maybe mistake or misconception that we have, is that a lot of decisions that we make about strategy, about growth, about tactics even, they're all based on some assumptions that we make about the customers, about the product, about behavior, based on what we learn from other people, from other marketers. And I think assumptions are inevitable. We can never know everything. We will have to make educated guesses. Sometimes that's okay. But when we rely on them too much, that's where we kind of enter that theoretical territory where we think something might work, but then it doesn't, and we don't know why. And customer research brings us closer to the customer, sort of like, Captain Obvious. But also, we need to keep in mind that we're serving the customer ultimately. With marketing, we're trying to bridge the gap between the product and the customer, and we're trying to bring the product that will serve the customer to the customer that will benefit from it the most. So we really need to understand what's important to that customer, to that elusive, ideal customer profile that we're trying to reach. And what better way to do it than going directly to the customer we're trying to understand? I think there is this idea that research is a big scary thing that takes a while. It's long, it's expensive. It can be as long and as expensive and time consuming as you want to make it. But there are also ways to make it more manageable and still make it work for you. So you can still learn what you need to learn and operate not just on assumptions, which again are inevitable, but also complement that with the knowledge that you get from the customer. It just works. It just works better. It's like stumbling in the dark versus having a bit of a flashlight, illuminating your way. Again, you won't be able to see the whole room, maybe, but you can shine the light on different things and figure out where to go from there. Find the door.
I love that analogy. Just like, would you rather like walk through the dark and try to feel your way through? Maybe if you are familiar with the space, you could, but like if you can have like a flashlight, like why not? Why not?
And it's not to say that you won't find the door in the dark. You could be in a room that you're familiar with. As a seasoned marketer, we know a lot. We know what works broadly. We all understand, various tactical, various channels. They change a lot, obviously, but we have a lot of knowledge that we draw on, and that's where again we draw on assumptions because we based them on something. But so you can stumble to the correct solution and find the door, but it could take you longer. You could, have a few bumps and bruises on your legs if you kind of catch the table corner. And
feel like
if you have a light to eliminate UA, it just would be more straightforward and probably easier. Not a guarantee. Maybe it's a fake door, but that happens as well. I don't want to pretend that it work. It's 100% solution to everything, because it's not. As much as I would love to claim that if only you did research, all your problems would be solved. Not the case, but it does make a lot of things easier. Decision making specifically.
that, yeah, of course, and you won't get bruised. Hopefully, it minimizes you bruising your legs, so to speak. Yeah, especially in today's market where things are changing fast. Economy's changing, markets changing, companies are changing, budgets are changing. So I think that's even more important. That even if you have it figured out, like things can move and the room gets rearranged if we like double click on this analogy.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's a great point as well. What furniture was around yesterday may not be in the same position today. I mean, I don't know what kind of rule we're talking about anymore, but
I know, right?
Yeah.
Living room, change it every quarter.
Yeah.
The quarter, the TV moves or something else. I think another part to this analogy is it depends on what kind of flashlight you have. You can have like depending your approach, your flashlight could be like really weak, or like you can have. I'm not sure if you've seen this thing on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, where like it's the brightest flashlight in the world, where like you shine it to the sky and you can like it looks like it's day at night, but
I have not seen it. It sounds cool.
I will send it to you. Maybe I'll link it in the show notes as well. But I think the point is like there are certain questions that can really illuminate, so to speak, double clicking on this analogy, that can help people like really get more insights. I love what you shared on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. Like there was these 3 questions. Let's go. I would love to dig into them because I haven't really seen it before, and I'm like, wow, I haven't asked that to our customers here at Apkis before. One
Sure.
of them, so I will go to all 3. The first one is, what does XYZ mean to you? And you were talking about how what does whatever they were saying, it's easy to use or something like that, because it could really depend. What's easy to me might be different for your easy and something else. Can you talk a little bit more about that first question?
Yeah, that question I think was the only one I really wanted to share, and the other 2 I was trying to think, okay, what else what other questions help me along that you might not think about necessarily. And so when I run customer interviews, I usually follow the jobs to be done approach to trying to understand what's important to the customer. So I'm trying to understand what struggle they have before they came to the product that I'm interviewing them about, what motivated them to solve that struggle. Maybe if there was a trigger that propelled them to take action and to seek a better solution than sticking with what they had before. And once they found the product, what motivated them to keep trying it, what gave them that initial value, and how their lives changed. Sounds really grand, but we do look at what that desired outcome looks like with the product, because we do like to interview customers that actually love the product, love paying for it, and can't imagine going without it, no matter how small or how functional that product is. So those questions, I mean, I share them a lot, and they're fairly straightforward. You can ask them in different ways, but if you are a fan of jobs to be done approach like I am, you would know them. What did you do before? What made you make that choice? What motivated you, et cetera, et cetera. But when you actually come to the actual interview with an actual human being, of course, people have different ways to describe things. They have different vocabulary to describe what their journey, the way they talk about it, the way they talk about their experience. And a lot of the times people use words that we don't really dig into. We kind of intuitively understand what they mean, but if we think about them a little bit deeper and a little bit longer, we would see that it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So easy to use is a perfect example, because when we talk to people in SaaS, about software, easy to use comes up 99.99% of the time.
Right.
Easy to use and time saving, or if you talk about
Right.
issues like time consuming,
Mm.
and this is where this question becomes so important to ask, because you want to understand, well, for the lack of a better phrasing, what does easy to use mean to you? Does it mean that you don't have to go through 5 steps in the product to get a specific number that you need to look at? Does it mean the interface is pleasing visually and you sort of intuitively understand where you need to click to accomplish a task? And I'm just spitballing, because again, really depends on the product and really depends on what the person is describing. A lot of people think in terms of comparing that to a worse solution that they tried before, where they say, "Oh, it was clunky, it was hard to use," and then you start asking, what was hard about it? It took long, or maybe the font was too small. It could be a lot of different things, and if you don't dig into that, you end up during the analysis stage of the research process, you just end up with basically 10 interviews that tell you the same thing on the surface. They say, "Oh, the product is easy to use," which is not meaningful, because, for 3 of those people, easy to use meant the interface was, again, attractive, or whatever it is that they meant. And for 4, it meant that they didn't go through, 5 steps to get to a specific thing. So those are functionally completely different. But if you didn't ask, you would just kind of stick with, well, that was easy. What's easy? I mean, you're not Staples, right? So,
I like that.
and again, so those 2 examples, time consuming and easy to use, they're just because they come up so often, just because I think people's minds just jump straight to, okay, it saves me time, and it just, the process was frictionless. Well, and I just rephrased easy to use as frictionless, which to me could mean something different than it could mean you, for example. So it's important to ask that. It also helps when the person is struggling to explain what it is they're getting out of the product, because not every person is able to. Of course, it depends on what kind of product you're researching. If it's a highly technical, developer-oriented software, then you're likely to get a very detailed, specific answer. What was hard about their previous solution, what they could change, what they're looking for in their ideal one. But if you're talking about something, lower key, maybe like a scheduling tool, let's say Calendly. I mean, Calendly has grown a lot now. It's a lot more robust than it was when I started using it, for example. It was very, very straightforward when I started using it first. And people could really struggle to explain, what was easy, what easy meant to them when it came to Calendly, for example. Right. So it's super important to ask that.
I like that it goes back to what you mentioned earlier, like the power of customer research is you're trying to dispel or like confirm your assumptions. And somebody saying it's easy to use, the researcher or the marketer who's asking that has assumptions as to what it means. And you mentioned frictionless, and that's like the assumption that person has about that, and like really digging into that can really help really be more specific about what they're explaining about that. And that could be powerful information to use in emails or marketing copy or other places, rather than just like, our product is easy to use. It could be like, our product is, I'm not sure, whatever that person says easy to use means, rather than just like a generic term.
If they said it took me 2 steps instead of 7, you can say in your copy, you can say, take 5 steps out of the equation, get stuff done faster. Or, I mean, so that's a bit of a cliche too, but that's the idea. Instead of saying easy to use, because everyone says that.
Yeah, I like that. I mean that specificity kind of leads to the second question you asked about like specific examples. I think that's it seems like they're tied to each other. Or like, what does specifically XYZ or this term means to you, and can you give an example? So now they're like really getting into like what okay, you said it was frictionless. Tell me about that. What is an example of that? Is that second example really like what that means?
Yeah,
It's tied to that first question.
that second question is also very helpful if they're having trouble with the first question,
Mm,
because sometimes people don't have the language to describe their experience, no matter how hard you try. In that regard, it's helpful to suggest that they give you an example, so that when you analyze the example, you can sort of figure out what was in that example that made the difference to them. It can complement the first question. It can also act as a substitute if they're struggling, even explaining what
right.
something means specifically to them. But taken together, they should give you a very good picture of that term you're trying to kind of
Mm.
analyze and deconstruct is the verb I'm looking for.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's super important because they might say like it's frictionless, and then they walk you through the example and you're like, oh, actually that's another term, that's another value point that they're walking through. You're talking about it could be complementary or could substitute, or you could find other values that they're no jobs to be done, or things that they're finding important through that example itself. And that's why it's important to do ask that second question.
Yes, and often people when they start giving examples, and when they start also just trying to explain what they mean by easy to use or whatever it is that we're talking about, they actually end up going way deeper than just beyond saving time and it being not complicated. Especially when they give examples, you realize that this is actually not about saving time at all. This is about something completely different that they just didn't mention because it didn't occur to them maybe. And whether they realize it or not, they're giving you a really important insight
Right.
that you can then add to when you analyze. You can add that to the themes, even if you specifically didn't ask them, okay, you just mentioned a third value to you. You don't necessarily have to point it out. As long as they give it to you, you can just move on because you just got what you needed.
Exactly. That's so cool. I like that. That's a really important point of view there as well. I think the other valuable thing here is like, I mean, if they're already in the product, you can actually, it's almost like a little bit of not user testing, but you're like UX testing, where like you're actually seeing them like click around and see if they, them using the product itself can be super helpful as well. As to like maybe they have suggestions for improvements there at that point as well.
I have actually never asked people to do that.
Oh, do they just say the story or they don't share the screen?
No,
Oh,
I don't want them to. I want them to tell me what
interesting.
they remember. So of course
Ah,
here it's important to only target people for those sort of in-depth interviews that are actually involved in the product uh, at the frequency you want them to be involved. You want them to know the product deeply and care for it about it.
that they remember.
So they have like a good idea of what's important. They're in it regularly, whether that be daily or monthly, doesn't matter whatever makes sense for the product. But I want them to talk about what comes to mind first, because that's what's important.
Mm.
Because if they're in the product and if they're clicking around as we're talking, there could be things that pop up that they appreciate. Like, oh, by the way, this is cool.
And they get distracted.
But they would not bring it up if we were talking about the product, kind of removed from the direct experience in the moment, because it's not something that's ultimately that important to them that they would continue paying for it.
Mm.
It's like nice to have. And it would be nice for me to know that they find that this feature is cool, but it's not necessarily actionable in the short term, because I'm really looking to understand the big themes. Like what is so important that he would talk about it all day long, about the value and how excited he were when you had that aha moment in the product for the first time and you realized, yes, this is something I need and something I'm going to be doing. We're really looking for those big
Exactly.
realizations that I think being directly in the product kind of takes away from that. But
Yeah. I like that point.
but again, that's kind of venturing into the realm of the UX testing that is a bit different, and
Makes sense.
it's an
I like
art
that.
of its own.
Yeah. You make a really good point here about that you want to be talking to fans of the product, people who are like your best customers essentially, and that's something that for people tuning in, like these questions are ones that how would yeah, I mean that's probably a question I would ask you, like who would you be asking these questions to? And I'm guessing it's your best customers, but what does applying this, what does best customers mean if that was the
So
answer?
best customers, again, this is with the caveat that, again, every product is different and it depends, the favorite two words of every marketer. But we would like to talk to people who are paying for the product, because we want to talk to people that actually made that decision to pull out the credit card and go through the pain of payment to use whatever it is that the product offers, because it's important enough to them. We also want them to be fairly recent so that they actually remember the first experience of using the product, and also remember what it was like before they had the product. And that recency can actually vary a lot. So, you often hear saying 3 months, signed up, 4 months, 5 months, depending on the product, it could be as long as a year. It really, really depends. But you do want to talk to people that have preferably used the most recent iteration of your product. You're not talking to your very, very first customer that signed up with you 5 years ago, with your MVP version and stuck around because they happen to be matching the ideal customer profile and they still love it. I mean, you probably would cherish them as your first customer, but their experience is not the same as the experience of someone signing up for the product for the first time, say in the last month, because the product changes and you want to have a glimpse of what it's like for the users right now, with how your product exists right now, not how it was a year ago or 2 years ago, because products change.
Yeah.
Some change faster than others. So if you iterate really rapidly and if you roll out version after version after version, it would probably make no sense to talk to people who signed up 2 months ago. But again, really depends.
That I like that. They're paying customers. That's recent. And when I say recent, it depends on the product. Like it could really depend on the how often the change of the product happens. But like, you don't want it to be like they've been customer for like 10 years, so to speak. Is that what?
Yeah, and it really depends on what you're trying to learn through the research. If we're talking about that, the jobs to be done approach, zeroing in on what the ideal customer wants and needs, then recency is important. I'm trying to think of an example where you would want to talk to someone who's been around for 10 years.
Maybe not for the purpose of this.
Yeah, no, it would have to be something different for sure.
Yeah.
And something else to keep in mind is that if your product is complex and serves different types of customers, you could get fancy with really what customers you target. Right. You could, maybe you want to look at customers who are paying at a higher tier only. Yeah. Maybe you want to learn from a specific user base that maybe is using a specific tier of your product because you're interested in expanding. Maybe you want to exclude people who are at the lowest pricing tier because maybe you're thinking of going into freemium and you want to make sure that you keep the really important features paid, for example. Maybe if you want to go into enterprise, that gets tricky. If you don't have enterprise customers, you're sort of guessing at this point. So you really need to look at what you're trying to achieve and how complex your product is. But
that makes sense. Yeah.
But you also need enough customers to learn from. So if you're just starting out and if you have 50 customers total, I would just talk to everyone. Well, yeah. I wouldn't run 50 interviews, to be clear, but I would survey all 50 customers and then talk to 9 or 10.
Makes sense. I like that approach. I want to get into the third question. It says, what would you like to add? Anything I didn't ask? Would you like to add anything I didn't ask? I think that's just it's a great way to like learn if if there's something else that they want to chat about, is what I'm guessing from this. Any like broad strokes.
It's a really good way to end the interview and make sure that you cover something that they might find important to think about or to mention to you, that might not necessarily be in the scope of research at all, but you do want to make them feel heard, and they might have important feedback. They might have a compliment to your team, which I actually find happens a lot. If they're a fan, they very often they compliment the support, for example, or they say nice things, and that always looks nice in their research report. I like to put like little quotes slide at the end to see like what nice things were said about you. I think the teams appreciate that as well. And sometimes it's complaints about maybe technical difficulties or some sort of issue, and that's just, it's important to ask, because it's also important. If it's important enough, I can always pass it on to the actual team to flag. A lot of the times they say that they actually are aware of it because the customer has already got in touch with them about that. But it's mostly there to make sure that you make it clear that it's not just for you to learn from them. It's also a chance for them to share something that it's important that they want to share. And a lot of the times they say, no, we covered a lot of ground and I don't have anything to add. Thank you very much. So it's not a time waster by any means. It's just, it is a nice way to end the interview on a very open note where you're giving them a chance to talk about whatever they want to talk about.
And I think that's important. The last part, one of the things you mentioned about like it makes them feel heard. Where like here you can say whatever you want now, feedback, compliment, questions, anything else you want to add. And I feel like that's some of my best memories of like one-on-ones with a manager usually ends with like we've covered all of our agenda items. Is there anything else? Would you like to talk about anything else, Ramley? And I feel like, oh, okay. I feel it feels good. Yeah, I guess if that makes sense.
And I feel like it's also important for anyone being on the interviewer side to make sure that they feel comfortable enough to share throughout the interview. Because if they can't feel like they can speak openly, they might not share important insight. So in this regard, me being an independent consultant and researcher helps a lot, because when I talk to customers, I say I work with the team. I don't work for them. So you can share whatever you want with me. It's not, you're not going to hurt my feeling. It's not my product. It's their product. They will learn about it because, that's the whole point of us being here, but you can be very open with me, and a lot of people appreciate it. So having that rapport is important. And then at the end, when you're wrapping up, that just sort of solidifies it, because you show them that you are interested, not just in the questions that you have, but also what they have to say beyond that. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
That makes sense. I like that. Thank you for sharing those three questions. I feel like they're something that I'm gonna start implementing into my own practice. I know one other topic you wanted to talk about marketing is around the ethics of marketing and research. I'm curious, like what are those things that people need to consider when they're ethical approach to marketing and customer research and even in growth.
I think as a researcher, I think about ethics a lot. And in the academic setting for research, it's been really entrenched that you have to, every study you conduct has to be done ethically, and there are specific guidelines and rules around it. I think for marketing, being ethical, it means being principled and kind of standing by your values. And I actually realized that not all people are driven by values. And what I mean by that is that for some people, it's important to, like, they have really defined a value stance or a moral stance on a range of issues. And some people do not. And I don't think one is worse or better than the other. I just think some people find it harder to not be driven by values or whether in their work or in their professional life. So it's very rapidly become like a really philosophical discussion, I think. And when you talk about ethics, especially in marketing, it is in a way philosophical. And also, I think it's important to talk about like what is actually like, what do we mean by ethical marketing? And if you Google ethical marketing, you will find a definition. And because I actually did that out of curiosity. And it's defined as the marketing approach that is driven by principles, integrity, commitment to transparency, and like good stuff like that. But apparently, that was also tied to the actual marketing strategy and tactics. So you kind of you infuse your messaging with it. You position yourself as an ethical brand, which is not what I think about when I think about ethical marketing. To me, it's more internal, and it is making the decision about what you are not going to do when you're growing your product, when you're growing your company. Because I think ethics to me are all about what you're not doing, what you're choosing not to do.
Yeah.
And I think ethics is another guardrail that you put around your strategy that is necessarily going to be limiting in a way, but also will help you focus a bit more. And I think focus is where success comes in, because the more focused you are, especially in marketing, especially for growth purposes, the easier it becomes.
That makes sense. I think that's so important. Like what are things you're not going to do if you're faced with that situation? And people don't think about that enough, especially if I think we mentioned around values, having clear values should guide those. Like, does it, if it doesn't fit in our values, then it shouldn't be something that we would do or say or approach, no matter how painful it could be.
I think it's kind of the opposite of growth at all costs,
Mm,
which I think we're transitioning out of it now,
yeah.
given where we are in this year 2023. But growth at all costs, like I think we will agree that growth at all costs is no longer something that we want to do collectively as marketers. But also, I think it's also as much about making that decision. Okay, yeah, exactly what we're not doing. And even if it's defined as broadly as, okay, we're not going to be growing at all costs, that to me is already like ethics. Like you're trying to put some ethical angle in to your marketing, to your future strategy.
I like that. That makes sense. It really is something that, as marketers, that we need to be thinking a lot more, especially with things that are changing. I want to shift gears one last time and talk about career power ups.
Yeah.
You're the founder and co-consultant at SMM Headquarters, and you previously were the marketing director at an accounting and bookkeeping startup. I'm curious, what's helped you? And before that, you were a researcher at University of Toronto. I'm curious, what's a career power up that's helps accelerate your career, or like giving you a leg up in terms of like your journey so far?
I think what helped it was my flexibility and the desire to change and shift gears when something wasn't quite working. And looking back at me working for that bookkeeping startup, I made all of the mistakes you would expect the marketer to make.
Yeah.
And I think me operating on assumptions was 100%, well, maybe 99% root cause of all the mistakes. And again, looking back, because it was a while ago, I didn't know what I didn't know. And now I know what I didn't know. And I obviously would never go back to that place of not knowing. And I wish I found that customer research in marketing approach sooner than I did. But
Yeah.
what brought me from there to here was that kind of search on what would actually be working for me as a professional, where I could make a difference in marketing, what kind of marketing I wanted to do, what kind of marketing I wasn't willing to do as well. Because my consultancy is called SMM Headquarters because I started off as a social media marketer when I decided to start something of my own. And I decided to keep the name there because it's just a name. But and I think so, not to be too verbose about it, but I think the marketing power up was that the flexibility that I I had the opportunity to try different things and keep iterating on what I could offer. That brought me to where I am now, because again, I, as a marketer, went through so many versions of what I could offer, from social media to Google Ad, to paid acquisition strategy in general, to customer research, to customer-led growth. And now here we are talking about product marketing and ethics and all the good stuff, and not making assumptions.
That's so good. It ties back to what we were talking about earlier about, like, why you do customer research is to, help you with your assumptions. It's been everything we talked about like ties to this around, like, knowing what to do and not to do is super important as a marketer, and really like exploring things and trying it out. With that, it's exactly what I heard has helped you with your career.
Yeah, exactly. And always learning through our mistakes, unfortunately.
If you enjoyed this episode, you'd love the Marketing Powerups newsletter. I share the actionable takeaways and break down the frameworks of world-class marketers. You can go to marketingpowerups.com to subscribe, and you'll instantly unlock the 3 best frameworks that top marketers use to hit their KPIs consistently and wow their colleagues. I want to say thank you to you for listening, and please like and follow Marketing Powerups on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. If you're feeling extra generous, kindly leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and leave a comment on YouTube. It goes a long way in others finding out about Marketing Powerups. Thanks to Mary Sullivan for creating the artwork and design, and thank you to Faisal Kaigo for editing the intro video. And of course, thank you for listening. That's all for now. Have a powered up day.
Marketing Power-Ups. Until the next episode,